While others fought for territory with guns and blood, he built an empire with strategy and silence. They called it the Solntsevskaya Bratva. He called it the future of crime. Viktor Averin was born in 1958 in Solntsevo, a sprawling residential district on the southwestern edge of Moscow that most people considered unremarkable. Row after row of Soviet apartment blocks, factories belching smoke, streets where working-class families struggled to survive on wages that never seemed enough. The district was named after a village that had been swallowed by Moscow's expansion, and its residents were the kind of Soviet citizens that propaganda celebrated but reality forgot. Workers, clerks, technicians who kept the machinery of the state running while living in cramped apartments and standing in breadlines. But beneath Solntsevo's ordinary surface, something extraordinary was forming. The district had produced a generation of young men who understood that the Soviet system was a lie, that hard work and party loyalty led nowhere, that the only people who prospered were those willing to operate outside official rules. These young men, Viktor among them, grew up watching black marketeers drive better cars than factory directors, seeing criminals live better than honest workers, understanding that in Soviet society, breaking the rules was often the only rational choice. Viktor was different from the typical Soviet delinquent. He was intelligent, well-read, analytical, the kind of mind that could have excelled in university or government service if the system rewarded merit rather than connections and party loyalty. But Viktor saw through the Soviet facade early, recognized that official positions meant nothing compared to real power, understood that the future belonged not to those who served the state but to those who built their own structures independent of it. By his late teens, Viktor was already involved in the underground economy, trading contraband, smuggling goods, participating in the black market networks that actually kept Soviet citizens supplied with products the official economy couldn't provide. But even then, he was thinking bigger. He saw that individual criminals, no matter how successful, were vulnerable to arrest, to rivals, to the chaos of operating without organization. What was needed was structure, organization, a criminal enterprise that operated with the discipline and planning of a business rather than the chaos of street gangs. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Viktor Averin became one of the founding members of what would become the Solntsevskaya Bratva, the Solntsevo Brotherhood. The organization started small, just a group of young criminals from the Solntsevo district who recognized that cooperation was more profitable than competition, that organization was stronger than chaos, that building something together could achieve what individuals never could. The Bratva was different from traditional Soviet organized crime. It wasn't based on the Vori v Zakon model, with its ancient codes and prison camp traditions. Viktor and his partners were creating something new, a criminal organization that borrowed elements from the Vori tradition but adapted them for modern circumstances, that valued results over tradition, that was willing to compromise when necessary rather than adhering rigidly to outdated codes. They were building a hybrid, criminal enough to profit from illegal activities, businesslike enough to manage those activities professionally. Viktor's role in this early Bratva was crucial. He wasn't the most violent member. Others handled enforcement and intimidation. He wasn't the most charismatic. Others served as public faces when necessary. But Viktor was the strategist, the planner, the one who thought about organization, structure, and long-term growth rather than just the next score. He understood that building a criminal empire required more than courage and violence. It required intelligence, planning, and the ability to see opportunities that others missed. During these formative years, the Bratva established control over rackets in Solntsevo and surrounding districts. Protection, extortion, theft, black market trading. They were careful to avoid attention, to stay below the threshold where Soviet authorities would feel compelled to crack down. The KGB was watching, always watching, but as long as the Bratva didn't become too visible, didn't challenge party authority directly, they could operate with relative freedom. It was a delicate balance, and Viktor helped navigate it by ensuring the organization stayed disciplined, stayed smart, stayed under the radar. By the mid-1980s, as Mikhail Gorbachev's reforms began loosening the Soviet system's rigid controls, Viktor Averin saw what many others missed. The Soviet Union was dying, and its death would create opportunities unprecedented in modern criminal history. While politicians debated perestroika and glasnost, while ordinary citizens hoped reforms would improve their lives, Viktor was preparing for chaos. He understood that the planned economy's collapse would create demand for goods and services that the official system couldn't provide. He saw that privatization would put state assets worth billions up for grabs. He recognized that the loosening of controls would allow criminal organizations to operate more openly, to expand beyond traditional rackets, to infiltrate legitimate business in ways that had been impossible under strict Soviet control. The coming chaos would be devastating for ordinary people but paradise for criminals who were organized, disciplined, and ready to exploit every opportunity. Viktor began positioning the Solntsevskaya Bratva for this future. He built relationships with corrupt officials who would survive the Soviet collapse and wield influence in whatever came next. He accumulated resources, money, connections, leverage, that could be deployed when opportunities arose. He recruited intelligent young criminals who understood that the old ways were dying and new methods were needed. He was preparing the Bratva not just to survive the Soviet collapse but to thrive in its aftermath. His planning was sophisticated and far-sighted. While other criminals were focused on immediate profits from traditional rackets, Viktor was thinking about how to position the Bratva to seize legitimate businesses during privatization, how to launder criminal proceeds through the banking system that was emerging, how to establish international connections that would allow the organization to operate globally. He was building infrastructure for crimes that hadn't even been committed yet, preparing for opportunities that hadn't yet materialized. When the Soviet Union finally disintegrated in 1991, Viktor Averin and the Solntsevskaya Bratva were perfectly positioned to exploit the chaos. While the country descended into economic collapse, political uncertainty, and social disorder, the Bratva moved decisively to seize opportunities that Viktor had been preparing for. The privatization of Soviet state assets was the greatest criminal opportunity in modern history, and the Bratva exploited it ruthlessly. Factories, warehouses, real estate, natural resource companies, all suddenly available for purchase, often for absurdly low prices. The Bratva had accumulated cash from years of criminal operations, and Viktor directed its deployment strategically. They didn't just steal, they bought, investing criminal proceeds in legitimate businesses that could generate legal income and provide cover for continued criminal activities. But acquisition was only the first step. Viktor understood that controlling these assets required protection, and in the chaotic 1990s, protection meant violence. The Bratva built enforcement arms capable of defending their interests, eliminating rivals, and intimidating anyone who threatened their operations. Contract killings became routine. Business disputes were settled with bullets rather than lawsuits. The streets of Moscow became war zones where criminal organizations fought for control of the new Russia's wealth. Viktor's genius was in balancing violence with business acumen. While the Bratva's enforcers were fighting wars in the streets, Viktor was establishing legitimate business operations, building relationships with emerging oligarchs, creating financial structures that could launder hundreds of millions of rubles. He understood that violence was necessary but temporary. Once territories and businesses were secured, the real money came from managing them professionally, from turning criminal proceeds into legitimate investments, from building an empire that straddled the line between legal and illegal so thoroughly that separating the two became impossible. What distinguished Viktor Averin from other Russian criminals of his era was his understanding of organization. While others built criminal gangs, Viktor built a criminal corporation. The Solntsevskaya Bratva under his influence developed sophisticated structures, hierarchies, and operational methods that made it more effective than rivals who relied on brute force and personal loyalty alone. Viktor implemented systems for managing the Bratva's diverse operations. Each racket had leaders who reported through clear chains of command. Profits flowed upward through established channels, with percentages allocated according to predetermined formulas. Disputes were resolved through internal mechanisms rather than street violence that attracted law enforcement attention. The Bratva operated like a business because Viktor understood that businesses were more sustainable than gangs, that systems outlasted individuals, that organization was the difference between temporary success and enduring power. He also understood compartmentalization. The Bratva's operations were divided so that people involved in one area didn't know details about others. This protected the organization from informants and law enforcement. Even if someone was arrested and cooperated, they could only reveal information about their specific area of operation. It was a structure borrowed from intelligence agencies and revolutionary cells, adapted for criminal enterprise, and it proved remarkably effective at protecting the Bratva's leadership from prosecution. Viktor established the Bratva's international expansion strategy. He recognized early that Russia's chaos wouldn't last forever, that law enforcement would eventually adapt, that the organization needed to diversify geographically to survive long-term. The Bratva established operations in Europe, Asia, and eventually the Americas, creating a global network that could move money, contraband, and people across borders. This internationalization made the Bratva more powerful but also more complex to manage, requiring sophisticated coordination and communication systems that Viktor helped design and implement. Unlike many Russian criminals who became public figures, appearing in media, associating with celebrities, living ostentatiously, Viktor Averin maintained an extremely low profile. He understood that visibility was dangerous, that the most successful criminals were those nobody knew about, that true power came from operating invisibly while others drew attention. This invisibility was strategic and disciplined. Viktor avoided being photographed, rarely appeared in public contexts where he might be identified, conducted business through intermediaries when possible. Law enforcement knew his name. His file in Russian intelligence agencies was thick, but they struggled to build prosecutable cases because he never personally committed crimes that could be definitively proven. He was always one step removed from actual criminal activity, insulated by layers of subordinates, protected by the organizational structure he'd helped create. His low profile also protected him from rivals. In the violent 1990s, when contract killings were routine and criminal leaders were assassinated regularly, Viktor survived because many rivals didn't even know who he was. While more visible Bratva members were targeted, while oligarchs and businessmen connected to the organization were killed, Viktor operated in shadows so deep that even other criminals couldn't identify him as a target. His invisibility was armor more effective than bodyguards. His anonymity a weapon sharper than any gun. This approach required enormous discipline. Viktor had to resist temptations that destroyed other criminals, the desire for recognition, for public acknowledgement of success, for the status symbols that announced wealth and power. He lived well but not ostentatiously, accumulated wealth but didn't display it publicly, wielded power but never announced it. He was the ultimate gray cardinal, the power behind the throne, the invisible hand guiding the organization, the architect who built the empire but never claimed credit for its construction. Through the 1990s and early 2000s, the Solntsevskaya Bratva grew into what many considered the most powerful criminal organization in the world, and Viktor Averin was one of the key architects of that power. The Bratva's operations spanned continents, generated billions in revenue, and influenced legitimate business and government at the highest levels. The organization controlled substantial portions of Russia's natural resource exports, using a combination of legitimate ownership and criminal coercion. They owned or influenced oil companies, natural gas operations, metal exporters, industries that generated Russia's primary wealth. Through these holdings, the Bratva wasn't just a criminal organization. It was an economic force, capable of influencing markets, affecting prices, and wielding power that rivaled corporations and even some governments. Their money laundering operations were among the most sophisticated in the world, moving billions through international banking systems, using shell companies, false invoicing, and legitimate business fronts to transform criminal proceeds into apparently legal wealth. Viktor's understanding of finance and his strategic thinking were crucial to developing these systems, which allowed the Bratva to accumulate and deploy wealth on a scale that previous criminal organizations could only imagine. The Bratva also maintained traditional criminal operations, extortion, drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, fraud schemes, but Viktor ensured these were managed professionally rather than chaotically. Each operation had clear objectives, defined methods, and accountability. Profits were maximized through efficiency rather than recklessness. Risks were calculated and managed rather than ignored. The Bratva operated its criminal enterprises the way legitimate corporations managed business divisions, and that professional approach made them extraordinarily successful. One of the most controversial and murky aspects of Viktor Averin's career involves alleged connections between the Solntsevskaya Bratva and Russian intelligence services. These connections, difficult to prove but widely rumored, suggest that the relationship between Russian organized crime and the Russian state is far more complex than simple law enforcement versus criminals. Some intelligence analysts and defectors have claimed that elements of Russian organized crime, including potentially the Solntsevskaya Bratva, served as unofficial tools for intelligence operations, conducting activities that the government wanted done but couldn't do officially, laundering money for officials, gathering intelligence, intimidating enemies of the state. These allegations are consistently denied by both criminals and government officials, but patterns suggest that at minimum, an accommodation exists, a mutual understanding where organized crime doesn't threaten state interests and the state doesn't seriously threaten organized crime. Viktor, with his strategic mind and understanding of power structures, would have recognized the value of such relationships if they existed. Having connections to intelligence services would provide protection from prosecution, access to information about law enforcement investigations, and opportunities to use state power for private criminal purposes. It would also create vulnerabilities. Becoming too useful to intelligence services means becoming controlled by them, losing independence, being deployed for purposes that might not serve the organization's interests. Whether Viktor actually maintained such connections remains unknown and probably unknowable without access to classified intelligence files. But the patterns of the Bratva's operations, their apparent immunity from serious prosecution during certain periods, their survival when other organizations were dismantled, their ability to operate in areas where state security should have prevented criminal activity, suggest that someone in the organization had relationships with power structures beyond typical criminal corruption. When Vladimir Putin consolidated power in Russia in the early 2000s, the rules changed for organized crime. Putin's government began bringing oligarchs to heel, demonstrating that wealth without political alignment was vulnerable. Some oligarchs were prosecuted and imprisoned, others fled into exile, still others made accommodations with the new regime. The message was clear. In Putin's Russia, the state was the ultimate authority, and everyone, businessmen, oligarchs, criminals, had to recognize that or face consequences. The Solntsevskaya Bratva, under leadership that included Viktor's strategic guidance, adapted to this new reality. The organization became more cautious, more careful about attracting attention, more strategic about maintaining relationships with power. They understood that Putin's Russia operated differently than Yeltsin's chaos. There were rules now, unofficial but real, and survival meant understanding and following them. Viktor's low-profile approach became even more valuable in this environment. As Russian authorities cracked down on visible criminals, as prosecutions targeted those who'd drawn attention during the 1990s, Viktor's invisibility protected him. He was known to intelligence services, yes, but he hadn't made himself a public target, hadn't embarrassed the government, hadn't given authorities political reasons to prosecute him. He'd built his power quietly, and that quietness allowed him to maintain it when louder criminals were brought down. The Bratva also shifted more operations abroad, recognizing that Russia was becoming more difficult and risky. European operations expanded, Asian markets were developed, and the organization became truly international rather than Russia-based with international extensions. This geographic diversification was partly defensive, spreading risk across multiple jurisdictions, but also opportunistic, exploiting global markets and the difficulties of international law enforcement cooperation. Viktor Averin was instrumental in establishing and managing the Solntsevskaya Bratva's European operations, which became crucial to the organization's long-term success and survival. Europe offered opportunities that Russia increasingly didn't. More stable legal systems that could be manipulated, banking systems that could be exploited for money laundering, markets for drugs and other contraband, and most importantly, distance from Russian law enforcement. The Bratva established significant operations in Spain, particularly the Costa del Sol, which became a haven for Russian criminals. They owned real estate, operated businesses, and managed criminal enterprises from Spanish bases. Viktor's strategic thinking was evident in how these operations were structured. Legitimate businesses provided cover and laundering mechanisms. Criminal activities were insulated through intermediaries, and the organization maintained relationships with local criminals and corrupt officials. Germany became another major base, particularly for money laundering and financial operations. The Bratva used German banks and businesses to move money, exploited Germany's position as Europe's economic center, and established networks that connected Russian criminal proceeds to European legitimate commerce. Viktor understood that Germany's sophisticated financial system could be penetrated through corruption, exploitation of regulatory gaps, and the complexity that made tracking money extraordinarily difficult. The UK, France, and other European countries also hosted Bratva operations. The organization's European network allowed it to operate across borders, to exploit jurisdictional gaps in law enforcement, and to diversify risk by not depending too heavily on any single country. When one country's authorities cracked down, operations could shift to others. When regulations tightened in one area, the Bratva adapted by changing methods or locations. It was organizational flexibility built on strategic planning, and Viktor's influence was evident throughout. One of Viktor Averin's most important roles involved managing the Solntsevskaya Bratva's financial resources, including its version of the Obchak, the common fund that criminal organizations maintained for operational expenses, supporting imprisoned members, and funding new ventures. But the Bratva's finances went far beyond traditional Obchak. They'd built a financial empire that rivaled legitimate corporations in complexity and sophistication. Viktor understood finance in ways that most criminals didn't. He'd studied how money moved through international systems, how banks worked, how to exploit regulatory gaps and jurisdictional boundaries. This knowledge allowed him to design laundering systems that transformed hundreds of millions in criminal proceeds into apparently legitimate wealth. Money from drug trafficking, extortion, and fraud moved through chains of transactions so complex that tracing it required resources and expertise that most law enforcement agencies lacked. The Bratva's financial operations included legitimate investments that generated real returns. Viktor directed criminal proceeds into businesses, real estate, and financial instruments that produced legal income. This served multiple purposes. It laundered money, it diversified the organization's revenue sources, and it built legitimate wealth that couldn't be seized as proceeds of crime. The Bratva became both a criminal organization and an investment fund, and Viktor was the chief financial strategist making both sides work together. Managing these resources required sophisticated accounting, careful record-keeping, and absolute trust, or absolute control through fear. Viktor managed through both. He built systems that tracked money flows, that accounted for every ruble, that ensured profits were distributed according to agreed formulas. But he also ensured that anyone who stole from the organization, who skimmed or embezzled, faced consequences so severe that theft was almost unthinkable. The Bratva's finances were managed with corporate efficiency backed by criminal enforcement, and Viktor was the architect of both systems. One of Viktor Averin's most important but least visible achievements was his work on ensuring the Solntsevskaya Bratva could survive beyond its founding generation. Many criminal organizations collapse when their founders die or are imprisoned because they're built around personalities rather than systems. Viktor understood this vulnerability and worked to create an organization that could endure. He identified and mentored younger criminals who showed intelligence, discipline, and strategic thinking, the qualities that had made him valuable to the organization. He ensured these younger members understood not just how to commit crimes but how to manage criminal enterprises, how to think long-term, how to balance risk and reward. He was creating a cadre of leaders who could sustain the organization after the founding generation was gone. Viktor also worked to institutionalize the Bratva's operations, to create systems and structures that didn't depend on any single individual. He established protocols for decision-making, dispute resolution, profit distribution, and succession. He built redundancy into critical operations so that losing any individual wouldn't cripple the organization. He was creating an institution rather than just a gang, building something that could outlast the men who'd created it. This long-term thinking distinguished Viktor from most criminals, who focused on immediate profits and personal enrichment without concern for what happened after they were gone. Viktor was building legacy, creating something enduring. Whether motivated by ego, by genuine concern for the organization's survival, or simply by understanding that his own security depended on the Bratva's continued existence, he invested enormous energy in ensuring the organization would survive him. For law enforcement agencies across multiple countries, Viktor Averin represented a particular type of frustration. They knew he was important, knew he'd played crucial roles in building one of the world's most powerful criminal organizations, but they couldn't build prosecutable cases against him. His invisibility, his discipline, his careful insulation from direct criminal activity made him almost impossible to prosecute successfully. Russian law enforcement had thick files on Viktor, documenting his associations, his role in the Bratva, his various activities over decades. But association wasn't proof of specific crimes. Being a member of a criminal organization wasn't itself illegal under Russian law for much of the post-Soviet period. And Viktor had been so careful to avoid direct involvement in crimes that proving his guilt required evidence that was extraordinarily difficult to obtain. International law enforcement faced similar challenges. Interpol knew about Viktor. European agencies tracked his movements when he traveled, and various countries had opened investigations at different times. But international prosecutions required cooperation between countries with different legal systems, different evidentiary standards, and different priorities. Building a case strong enough to survive challenges in multiple jurisdictions was monumentally difficult, especially against someone as careful as Viktor. The few times authorities thought they had him, cases fell apart. Witnesses recanted or disappeared. Evidence proved insufficient. Legal challenges succeeded in suppressing key information. Viktor's lawyers, some of the best that money could buy, were skilled at finding weaknesses in prosecutions, at exploiting procedural rules, at creating reasonable doubt. And unlike many criminals who eventually made mistakes, who got sloppy or arrogant, Viktor maintained his discipline year after year, decade after decade. Information about Viktor Averin in recent years is scarce, which is exactly how he'd want it. Unlike other Russian criminals who've been prosecuted, killed, or forced into exile, Viktor seems to have simply faded from view. Whether he's genuinely retired, whether he maintains influence from shadows even deeper than before, whether he's even still alive, these questions don't have clear answers. Some intelligence analysts believe Viktor retired sometime in the 2010s, having accumulated sufficient wealth to live comfortably while younger generations managed the Bratva's operations. This theory suggests he withdrew strategically, recognizing that continuing active involvement increased risk without proportional benefit, that he'd built systems that could function without him, that retirement was both possible and prudent. Others argue that someone with Viktor's strategic mind and institutional knowledge would remain involved even if less visibly, that the organization would continue consulting him on major decisions, that his influence persists even if he's no longer operationally active. In this view, Viktor has achieved the ultimate criminal success, becoming so invisible that even intelligence agencies aren't certain whether he's still involved. There's also the possibility that Viktor has passed away, that his death went unreported because of his extreme privacy, that the organization he helped build continues without him because he'd prepared it for that eventuality. Without confirmation and given the opacity surrounding his life, even his current status is uncertain. What is clear is that if Viktor is still alive, he's now in his mid-60s, an age when most criminals are either dead, imprisoned, or genuinely retired. The world he helped create, the post-Soviet criminal landscape, the Solntsevskaya Bratva's global empire, continues to evolve without requiring his constant involvement. Whether through retirement, death, or simply achieving such complete invisibility that he's become a ghost even to those looking for him, Viktor Averin has disappeared from view as thoroughly as he operated in shadows throughout his career. Regardless of Viktor Averin's current status, his legacy is clear. He was one of the principal architects of what became the world's most powerful criminal organization. The Solntsevskaya Bratva that he helped build transformed from a neighborhood gang into a global enterprise, from street-level criminals into a sophisticated organization that operated like a multinational corporation, from chaos into structure that endured despite prosecution, violence, and the deaths or imprisonments of numerous leaders. The organizational principles Viktor established, professionalism, discipline, strategic thinking, long-term planning, became models that other criminal organizations studied and attempted to emulate. The Bratva's success demonstrated that criminal enterprises could operate globally, could penetrate legitimate business thoroughly, could accumulate wealth rivaling legal corporations, if they were managed with intelligence and sophistication rather than just violence and intimidation. Viktor also proved that the most successful criminals aren't the most visible. While flashy gangsters like John Gotti became celebrities and then prisoners, while violent bosses like Pablo Escobar fought governments and died brutally, Viktor built power quietly, maintained it invisibly, and survived by never giving law enforcement clear targets. His career demonstrated that in modern organized crime, brains matter more than brawn, strategy beats violence, and the ghost who nobody sees is more powerful than the king everyone knows. The Solntsevskaya Bratva continues to exist, though whether it maintains the cohesion and power of its golden age is debated. Russian and international law enforcement have successfully prosecuted numerous members, disrupted operations, and pressured the organization significantly. But it hasn't been destroyed, hasn't collapsed. continues to operate in various forms across multiple countries. That resilience, that ability to survive despite sustained pressure, is partly Viktor's legacy, the result of building systems and structures that could endure even when individuals were removed. Viktor Averin's life raises questions that may never be answered. How much wealth did he accumulate? Where is it now? What exactly was his role in specific Bratva operations? Did he have connections to Russian intelligence services? Is he still alive? If so, where? If he's dead, when and how did he die? Does he maintain any influence over the organization he helped build? These questions persist because Viktor succeeded in his primary objective: operating invisibly, leaving few traces, creating a life story that even intelligence agencies struggle to document completely. The opacity he maintained wasn't accidental. It was strategic, the result of decades of discipline, the price of survival in a world where visibility means vulnerability. His story also raises larger questions about organized crime in the post-Soviet world. To what extent do criminal organizations like the Bratva operate independently versus serving as tools for state power? How thoroughly has organized crime penetrated legitimate business and government in Russia and beyond? Can organizations built during the chaotic 1990s survive in the more regulated, more surveilled modern era? Will the Bratva tradition of sophisticated criminal enterprise continue, or will law enforcement eventually succeed in dismantling it? Perhaps the most important question is about legacy and succession. Viktor helped build an empire, but empires don't last forever. The criminal landscape continues evolving, younger generations have different priorities and methods, and the world that created the Bratva's opportunity has changed dramatically. Whether the organization can survive its founding generation, whether the principles Viktor established can be maintained by successors, whether the Solntsevskaya name will mean anything in another generation, these questions will only be answered with time. Viktor Averin proved that the most dangerous criminals aren't the ones you fear, they're the ones you've never heard of. While the world watched flashy gangsters and violent bosses, while media covered mob wars and spectacular arrests, Viktor built the Solntsevskaya Bratva from a neighborhood gang into the most powerful criminal organization on earth. He was the strategist who planned when others fought, the architect who designed systems when others chased quick scores, the ghost who operated in shadows so deep that even intelligence agencies struggle to document his story. He understood something fundamental that most criminals never grasp. True power comes from invisibility, from building structures that outlast individuals, from creating organizations rather than just gangs. He transformed criminal proceeds into legitimate businesses, built money laundering systems that moved billions, established international networks that spanned continents, and did it all while remaining so unknown that most people have never heard his name. They arrested other Bratva members, prosecuted bosses, seized assets, but Viktor remained untouchable, protected by discipline that never wavered, by invisibility that was armor better than bodyguards, by strategic thinking that kept him one step ahead of law enforcement for decades. Is he retired now, living comfortably on wealth accumulated from decades of crime? Is he still pulling strings from shadows even deeper than before? Is he even still alive, or did he die quietly, his death as invisible as his life? Nobody knows for certain, and that uncertainty is his greatest achievement. He built an empire that changed organized crime forever, proved that ghosts can be more powerful than kings, demonstrated that the criminals you should fear most are the ones whose names you'll never know. Viktor Averin, the architect who built the Brotherhood, the strategist who created an empire, the ghost who disappeared while everyone was watching the wrong people. In the end, he won the most dangerous game in the world not by fighting, but by never letting anyone know he was playing.